Hey, welcome to Mistake Man. I've got another model kit on my bench. As you can see, I've got the USS Voyager, and this is I believe, the original kit from Monogram. I think it was re-released under the Revel, um, and then, of course, there's a new round 2 polar lights. That's a different scale. This is a larger scale. I'm not sure if it says on the box anywhere what the scale is. It doesn't. The box doesn't say what scale this is, but I've seen it listed as 1/677 or 1/670. I've seen both of those numbers. This is obviously not a new kit. This is one of the originals, but it is new to me. I got it recently. I decided to go with this kit because I like the scale. I like the size of the model that comes out of it. Even though the newer round 2 kit has is a better mold. It solves many of the problems that existed with this original mold of this ship. It's a smaller scale. It's a 1/1000, which is really it's not bad. It's not a terrible size. It's still a pretty decent sized ship. Not sure exactly how big it is, but from never seen it in person, but from the pictures and videos I've seen, it looks to be maybe, I don't know, maybe be about the size of this box, maybe a little smaller. So it's not a terrible size for this ship, but I did like the size of this kit here, so I decided to go with that, even though I know it has some issues that I'm going to probably have to work on. So let's open it up and take a look at what's inside. As you can see, I've had this open before. Even though this is a very old kit, it wasn't used when I bought it. Um, all the parts were on their sprues and in their bags, but I have obviously taken them out of the bags, removed most of the pieces from the sprues. So there's our saucer. Nice, really good, really great size. That saucer. Here's my hand for scale. It's really great. I do like that. Secondary hull pieces. Do have a few pieces still on the sprue just so they don't get lost, just the smaller pieces. And then the clear pieces, I haven't taken most of those off the sprues. I did take two off. Two of these windows, I was curious about some of these little windows. So I took one of those off and I just taped it back to the sprue so it wouldn't get lost. There's our instructions. And our decals are tucked away in there. And as you might expect for a kit this old, the decals have gone yellow, so I probably won't be able to use these. I had a similar issue with the decals that were in my USS Defiant kit. They had gone yellow like this, and I did test to see if maybe they would turn out okay, but I didn't really like the way they looked. So I ended up just going with some aftermarket decals. I think I'll just skip straight to that conclusion with these and just get an aftermarket kit set of decals on these. Although I haven't got that yet. It's a pretty straightforward build as far as the assembly goes. It does have the nacelles that can change position. They can either be flat out for normal flight, or the nacelles can raise up to go into warp. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward build. So we'll be adding lighting to this kit to make all the windows glow, the deflector, torpedo tubes, warp engines, nav lights, all of that, all that good stuff. I'm gonna make it sparkle and shine, and I am gonna be doing some blinking pattern on some of the lights, the ones on the front here, the back, and on top. Now this kit is known to have issues. A lot of those issues, I understand, have been corrected in the latest version of this kit that's at the smaller scale. So I'm going to have to do some customizations on this in order to get some of those things corrected. Probably the biggest issue is the deflector dish. If you look at the box art, which is a actual picture from the show, a picture of the filming model, you can see the deflector dish glows around the outside, and then that inner portion that's in front of that does not glow. There's no lighting on that. But the piece I have for the deflector is molded out of gray plastic, so I wouldn't be able to light this as is. I suppose it would be possible to maybe route out all the channels in between there in order to let light through, but that sounds like a nightmare. And I already know that there is an aftermarket part available for this that's molded out of transparent plastic. I believe it's blue, transparent blue, but I'm not sure. But I am looking at getting that. The other issue is that this is the part that goes in front of the deflector dish, so they molded that in clear plastic in the original kit, and then this had a solid plastic, so they got that backwards. Really, this should have been the clear part, or at least the part that's on the inside there, which should have been out of clear plastic, and then this could have been out of just the gray. I do believe that was one of the items that was fixed in the new version of the kit. So I'm going to get that aftermarket version of the deflector. So that's one of the changes I'm going to make with aftermarket parts. I also looked at a few options for adding photo etch parts to the Voyager. There are a couple options available at this scale, and I ended up going with this one here from Green Strawberry. This is the one, see, they call it the 1670. I've also seen 1677. Either way, it's the same thing. And this is, it says for Revell, but it's the same, basically the same thing for the Monogram kit. I don't know, that they might have made some changes to the Revell kit, because I think I've seen pictures where these windows on the saucer, as you can see on this Monogram kit, they're just large rectangles, but that's not how they are in the show. I'll put up a picture of the studio model that shows the windows are actually more like they are on the secondary hull, where they're these narrower, taller rectangles that are divided down the middle. So we've got sets of 1, sets of 2, sets of 3, and that's how they really should be on the saucer as well, where you can see we've got different sizes of rectangle on the saucer. We've got the narrow one that's just one window. The next wider one would be, really ought to be 2 separate smaller smaller windows of the same width as that, and then this one, the wider rectangle, ought to be the 3. So the Monogram kit is molded like this, but I think I've seen pictures of other models at this same scale that did have the windows molded properly in the top, and I think that might be from the Revell kit. Somehow they fixed that in the tooling. I don't know how you'd actually do that, but that appears to be the case. I do have to cut out all these windows in order to, make them light up, get the light to pass through. I've already done a lot of that work, especially on the secondary hull. I've got all the windows drilled out. As you can see, those were all just molded solid, and I cut them all out. And I'll go into detail of the process. I still have a few left to do on the saucer, so I'll show that process later. But I've got those drilled out on the secondary hull. Both halves of that are done, as well as the bottom half of the saucer, the primary hull, which really is just a few. It's kind of interesting. The bottom half of the Voyager's primary hull is basically just flat straight across, except for this little bump right in the middle. It has a few windows, and it's got a few of those ones that are the larger style that have the clear plastic parts associated with them, or they get replaced with the more detailed version from the photo etch kit. So that's, this big one obviously, but then these larger ones here are also like that. So really there were just, 10 of these windows that had to actually be drilled out. And then there's a lot on the top half of the primary hull. And you can see I've got some of these already drilled out, and then some left to do. I've started drilling out. You can see I've just kind of drilled out those individual windows. Yeah, I mentioned that these windows are not really, they don't look the way they're supposed to, where they've just got these just big open rectangles, where they really ought to be more, like this, individual windows just in groups of 1, 2, or 3. I didn't notice that that was an issue. I didn't really know that they were supposed to be like that until after I'd already started drilling out these windows. As you can see, I just drill them out instead of drilling them into just those individual those groups of individual windows. I just drilled out the whole rectangle and cleaned that out. And then I noticed on pictures of the filming model that they were not supposed to be like that. And so I was kicking myself. I should have checked first before I started drilling windows, but I didn't. And I was thinking, oh, what am I going to do? How am I going to fix that? And then I stopped. That's why I didn't finish drilling out the rest of these, because then I was like, okay, maybe I want to leave these. I want to leave that little bit of material that's supposed to go between the windows, that division between the windows. Leave it as part of the original plastic here, and then just drill out the little windows next to it. But the nice thing about these is I could use the existing little recessed feature in the mold to help me know where to cut and drill out those windows. And I was able to, do a pretty good job of clearing those out. But without those guides for where those windows are supposed to be, I'd either have to go through and mark every single one, or I don't know. I was thinking, how am I going to deal with that? But then I thought, maybe I'll just get a little strip of styrene and run it down the middle of these squares that are really supposed to be a group of 2 windows, and then these wide rectangles that are supposed to be groups of 3. I just put 2 of those little strips of styrene in there to separate those out, and maybe that would work. So I went ahead and gave it a try, and it turned out really good. I drilled out all of this half of the primary hull before I realized that issue, and so I had to go back in and fill all these in. But yeah, I was concerned, obviously, that this was going to be a lot of work and a huge pain in the butt. But it wasn't. It actually turned out to be not too bad. It wasn't really too difficult to do. I mean, yeah, it was time consuming, but it was kind of fun to do. Like, this kind of precise detail work is just enjoyable for me. I just put on a podcast or a YouTube video or something, or even just play some music and just go to work. And it took me a few hours, but it was kind of fun. So I'm actually not like dreading doing the other half. In fact, I'm going to adjust the camera so we can get some backlight through this so you can kind of see how it looks. Okay, got an angled view up at my shop light here. Got a piece of paper that I can put as diffuser behind it. There we go. That's what it's supposed to look like, as opposed to what's up here on the top. That's what it would have looked like with just those big rectangles, but yeah, that looks much better. I want to show you the process that I've been using to cut out and clear out these windows. For the individual sections like these, I'm using a very tiny drill bit and drilling 2 holes, basically just to get some of that material removed. First thing I do is I use a drill to drill out some of the material from the windows. Now, these windows are obviously not round. They are nice, sharply cornered rectangles. And so a drill bit's only going to do so much, but the idea is to use the drill bit to remove as much material as possible, because that's just a quick, easy operation. But then I have to come back in after I've drilled out a hole and just use a hobby knife to cut out the rest of the shape out to the corners of the rectangles. That's a more time intensive process, so I try to remove as much as I can with the drill bit. So for the larger windows, I use not really as big of a drill bit as will fit, because I don't want to get so close to the edges that if I'm off just a little bit, then it ends up taking out a little chunk of the hull, because I don't want to have to, either cut out that window larger to remove that mistake or to try and fill that in again later. So I find a drill bit that's a little bit smaller, and I just, test it by grabbing the back of the drill bit there and then just seeing, okay, you can see that's got a little bit of clearance to it. And then for these widest rectangles, I'll drill out 2 holes to remove most of that material. For these, smaller rectangles, almost squares, there's just room for 1, so I'll drill out 1. And then for these individual ones, obviously this is way too big. I have to use something smaller. I don't know if you've seen these before. These are very, very tiny little drill bits, and they're kind of come in these interesting form. I think these are designed for printed circuit board manufacturing. That's a common use for them anyway. I'm sure there's other manufacturing processes that need tiny holes, but I think they come like this so that they can be put into automated tools so they can swap out bits, with an automated system. But these bits are so tiny. They break really easily. So I got a couple of these kits that have, I mean, honestly, like even opening this package scares me. Even if I jar this too much, they might break. They're just so tiny. So I find the right size. These are all much too small. I bought a kit that has multiple sizes, pretty much 2 of each size. So for drilling out the Voyager, I ended up using this size and this size. And you can see I've already broken some of them. This one is broken right in half. And then this one was also broken. I think I threw that away. Yeah, one of those, I was just taking my little drill and I just set it on the table. I dropped it just a little too hard. That was enough to just break it. So they're very fragile. The other one, I was also just setting the tool down and it kind of slipped out of my hand and dropped, and it hit bit first on the table, snapped it right off. So yeah, so I actually haven't had any break while I've been drilling through the model. It's just been clumsily setting the tool down. Once I figured out which size of bit I was using for this, and once I broke one of each size that I was using, I was very nervous that I was going to break the 2 remaining ones that I had, 1 remaining of each size. So I did order a kit of just the sizes that I needed. So just in case I broke more of them, I would have those ready to go. And this little Tamiya handy drill came in very handy for doing this. Very repetitive, but it runs at a great speed. You don't really have speed control, it's just on or off, but it runs at a good speed. And so I felt like I had good control while I was drilling these windows. So there's a bit more strategy to this than just the drilling. Obviously, I have to clear out some more of the plastic. But I learned a technique from another YouTuber. His channel name is The Kit Cave, and he's currently working on a build of the Enterprise D. And there are a lot of very tiny windows to drill out on that kit. And the technique he was using for those windows was to use a drill to remove some of the material. But because the plastic is pretty thick, I mean, there's a lot of material there to remove, that once you have the holes drilled out, then you can go behind and see where those holes are on the back and use a rotary tool like a Dremel or whatever and just kind of grind away some of that material just to thin it out right where those windows are. and then that way, I would flip it back over and use a hobby knife just to cut out the remaining material around where I drilled to get a nice crisp corners on these rectangles. And it made a lot easier to do that, not having to cut through such thick plastic because I've thinned it out in the back. So you can see I've done that there. I still need to do that for the rest of the windows on this side, but for all the others, you can see that's what I've done. And it worked really well. It's a little bit extra work, obviously, to have to go back in and use a rotary tool. And this is what I'm using. I've just got a little Black & Decker. I just put it on the lowest speed, and I've got just kind of like a diamond tipped grinding shaping bit in there. This is just a spherical one. Just remove some of that material, and that makes it easier to cut, and it also, I think, just ends up looking a little bit better. Instead of having a really thick hull on there, it thins that out just to a more, I think, realistic scale, and lets more light through from from the side, from different angles. So yeah, anyway, I think it just ends up looking a little bit better. And so I liked that technique that he used, and so I decided to give it a try on this, and it looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up these windows, and I'll just kind of demonstrate that process I've described. So I've already drilled out those tiniest ones, so I really just need to drill out the bigger ones. And I'm going to end up using this bit here because it seems to be the right size to give me just a little bit of extra wiggle room. Let me measure that so I can tell you how big of a bit this is. So that's a 1.8 millimeter bit. Okay, I've got all of the remaining windows drilled out. The next step is to remove material from them on the back using my little grinding bit on my rotary tool here. Okay, so the idea is to just kind of follow where the drilled through holes are, and knowing that there's two next to each other there, I know that's one of the long rectangles, so I'm just grinding out a section that's more or less going to be where that rectangle's at. This is just the single drilled hole, so that's just one of the smaller rectangle squarish ones. And then where the two tiny holes are, that's the single individual window, so I don't need to grind out as much. And this is just a first pass. I'm erring on the side of not removing enough material, just because I don't want to obviously remove too much, because that would be a disaster. Finished grinding out the remaining windows. at least the first pass of grinding. I've started cutting out a few of the windows, removing that last bit of material that's left in there. So I kind of want to show you how that works. A little tricky for me to do this on camera, but I'll see what I can do. But the idea is to just take a hobby knife and remove the material just up to where the hole turns down into the window. And then just try to keep the edges as straight as possible, the corners as square as possible, and try not to remove any more material than I need to, so don't go beyond, that line there. I take my time doing this. I don't try to take it all out in one go, in one pass of the knife. I'll just cut it back a little bit. Mostly just cut these corners out just to get it a little more rectangular. So something like that. And now I just take the knife and run it almost parallel to the guide edge, the final edge I want to stop at, and just carefully remove a little bit of material at a time. And honestly, the trickiest part about this is just holding the model in a position where the lighting is just right to catch that edge. So this view right here is pretty good. The light is hitting that just right, so you can see the shadow on that edge. And so I know how much more material I have to remove on this side. That's the idea. It takes a little bit of time to just go through here and carefully remove that edge, but I'd rather be careful and take the time that it takes to do a good job on these. I have the remaining windows cut out. The next step is to just go back and do another pass of grinding out behind the windows. The main reason is the first time I did the grind out on these windows is after I had just drilled the holes through, and so those drilled holes were all I had to go by to figure out where exactly that window shape was going to be. And so I just kind of took a guess on the rectangular shape around each drilled through hole. And for the most part, you can see I guessed pretty good. But there are a few spots where it's going to be a little close to the edge, like there. And some spots on the corners will be really close. So I like to go and do another pass just to kind of clean that up a little bit and try to grind out to a uniform thickness. And the main idea there is just when you look at the windows from the outside, what you see is that edge there, and if it's too thick on a corner, you can kind of see on this one where it's a little, that edge isn't straight, it's rounded. And if there are spots like that in some of these windows, I don't really want that to be visible from the outside. Okay, I've done a second pass on the gouging behind the windows, so that's all good. Now's the final step to go through and put in the little pieces of plastic to divide up the windows. So what I have here is a strip of styrene, 0.5 millimeter by 1 millimeter is what I'm using for these. And it's pretty simple, just cut off a tiny little piece of it, grab my tweezers, get it in place, and then put a little bit of glue, move on to the next one. The only tricky part about this is getting the correct length to cut. So what I did for these ones on this side was take a little piece of paper, hold it up against the window, and then make a little mark on a piece of paper at about where it's at. You can see around here, there's the mark from the last one I did. And then I just use that to help me cut the actual strip of plastic, and then get it in place, glue it, move on to the next one. And if this mark happens to work for the next one, I just reuse it. If not, then I'll just flip the paper over, make a mark on this side. So I'm going to adjust my camera so it's looking a little closer at what I'm doing so you can see, and I'll show you an example of how I do a couple of these. Okay, that one's pretty good. I wouldn't want to go any shorter than that. So I'll use the first one I cut as a guide for cutting the second one. Okay, that one is just a tiny bit oversized, but I'm okay with that because once I get the plastic cement on there, it's going to soften the ends of that plastic just enough that I can push it down in there without too much struggle. So I think that'll be just fine. Okay, now I've got the two windows in there. I just need to kind of push them around and adjust them until the windows are equal widths. So now that they're in place, I do like to give them an extra hit of glue. So the cement I'm using is this Tester's liquid cement for plastic. I like this stuff because it's, of the plastic cements that I have, this seems to be the hottest, meaning it reacts with the plastic, tends to melt it a little bit more, and forms a better bond. I do also have this Tamiya extra thin cement, and this is what I'm going to use to kind of do a follow-up glue on this. And that's because of the two, it's got a much finer applicator tip that I really need to get in around those windows. This is just this is just make a mess trying to use this. So I don't want to try and use that. But I do want to add a little bit of glue around those windows just to hold them in place. So I just kind of touch around just the joints, and the extra thin cement will tend to wick into small gaps. And if I do get a little bit of glue outside of the window, I don't try and wipe it off because it starts to melt the glue instantly, and if you wipe it, you're going to make you're going to mar the plastic. So I don't. I just leave it alone. And you can see in some places that I've already done, there's a little bit of spots where the glue just went beyond a little bit. So I just let it dry, and then once it's dry, it'll either just cover up with paint and primer and everything, and we'll never know that was there, or if I can see a little bit of a mark there after I primed it, I can just give that a quick little sand to smooth that out. Here's an example of one where I touched the glue touched the glue that had spilled over, and it marred the plastic. And I didn't do that on purpose. I just accidentally did that. So I tried to fix it a little bit, but really once that plastic starts to melt and if you try to move it around, it just makes it worse. So I left it alone, and I'm just going to have to sand that. So that's the process I've been using. That's what I used for this whole side of windows here. And once I got on the groove, it went pretty quickly. Just every now and then I'd get one that I either cut too short or I cut it too long, and I had to take several steps to shave it down. And so that one particular window would take a little bit longer. But for the most part, I went through that pretty quickly. It just took me a couple of hours. So I'm just going to put on some music and get to work on these. All right, so that's going to be it for this episode. I've got all the windows drilled out and taken care of. In the next video, I'm going to start working on the photo etch pieces and adding all of those details to the model. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.